Eccoci, ciao, buonasera a tutti quanti. Felicissimo di fare un evento online con la community. Finalmente, diciamo, si vede una speranza anche di rivederci fisicamente in sede. Però intanto andiamo avanti col nostro meetup. Con noi questa sera ci sta Gerard. E, e vi faccio innanzitutto un po' il riepilogo di quelli che sono i nostri canali dove ci potete raggiungere, dove ci potete trovare, per restare aggiornati su tutti i nostri eventi, quindi LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Slack per chi vuole, o YouTube, basta mettere mi piace. Nulla, a questo punto direi che posso lasciare la parola a Ermanno. Vi dico che alla fine del talk regaleremo 2 licenze JetBrains, quindi fortunati che lasceranno qualche commento o lasciano qualche domanda, regaleremo la licenza. Ermanno, a te la parola.
Eccoci. Buonasera ragazzi, è un grande piacere anche per me essere di nuovo con voi e perdonate se adesso faccio uno switch all'inglese, però è giusto per introdurre il nostro, diciamo, topic di oggi. So, thank you everyone, and it's very nice to host you, Gerard, today. And so he is a developer evangelist for web and cloud, and also a GD expert on Angular. And today, I mean, we will talk about progressive web apps. It's a topic that's common for a lot of our daily activities, and I think that will be a very interesting talk because we had a small chat in the beginning, and we knew we have a lot in common. I think all of us share a love for pizza and also for Angular, so that's why we are here today. And just a second before starting the meeting, I will like to tell you that on the 9th of July, we will be having another version of the online conference we had in October. It's called Angular Rome, for who doesn't know it. And in this occasion, we will have half-day event online that will be free, but also there will be other things coming up. So go on the website ngrome.io to keep it updated on topic. So Gerard, if you like to start, I'm ready to leave it, the stage to you and to your amazing presentation. So.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for the intro. I'm gonna be talking about few different technologies, and as you were mentioning, I'm going to cover PWAs. I'm going to cover progressive web apps. And along with this, I'm going to be also introducing GraphQL and Amplify DataStore. So there's going to be plenty of bits to learn. Let me just go ahead and start. Sorry, my phone is misbehaving. So let's get started. So the first thing is I'm going to start with my name. So I'm originally from Barcelona. I live in the UK for the last 10 years. And this is my name. It's quite difficult to pronounce. So this is Gerard Sanz. And I'm a developer evangelist for web and cloud. And the way I see a developer evangelist is someone that is an early adopter that sees a new technology and goes and tries it. And here is a picture of myself that I took on a Lake 32 here in England. And this was this winter, and the temperature was 10 degrees. I mean, the temperature was freezing. And if I use an analogy, I would say that, okay, I'm the crazy guy that goes into the lake at 10 degrees in the winter and wears this wetsuit and goes and swims around. And of course, what happens for a developer evangelist, when you go through an experience like this, you go back and you want to explain to other people how it is. So for me, I try new technologies and I try then to explain them to people, what are the benefits and why they should use them. So I think that's an overview of what I do. I've been doing this for 6 years now. This will be my 163 talk. I've been traveling around the world, so now I'm a little bit sad that I cannot travel. As we know, we are in the middle of the pandemic, so it's a little bit sad. But I'm, looking forward to go and travel again whenever that happens. I'm also now working on recording serverless training, and this is AppSync Masterclass. So this is a GraphQL, a managed GraphQL service that you can use to build your apps. And this is the stack, so you can use AppSync, Lambda, DynamoDB, Amazon Cognito, and also the serverless framework on top of PWAs and Tailwind. In between the front end and the back end, there is Amplify, and I'm going to also talk about Amplify today. So this is a little bit of intro. Let's get into the topic of this talk. And what I want you to think is, what is offline first? And maybe this seems like an odd question, but as most of us are web developers, we don't face offline that much. So when we are talking about using a web app, this could be something very much like Instagram, and you can imagine your user using your app. And when you are using a mobile app, we forget that we have some features that may be not available for web. And one of these features is going offline. So what happens when the user goes into a place where there's no internet? Well, it happens something that you probably don't want to see. And this is the dinosaur. And I don't know if you know, but you can play this game just pressing the space bar. So when you see the dinosaur in Chrome, you can press the space bar and play this game. And of course, this is all good, but imagine you are using your web app that you have invested so many hours building, and this is exactly not what you want your user experience to be. And from the user's perspective, you probably will get a reaction like this. That's not what we want. So in this talk, I'm going to cover how we can achieve offline first. And there are a few things that we need to take care for offline first. And I'm going to be covering for web specifically. You can also do offline first for mobile, but we are going to cover web. And the first thing we want to do, of course, is avoid the dinosaur. And we want to be what I call offline ready. So whenever the user goes offline while using your application, it will get some, experience of that app. And one thing that a lot of people do is just show some message like, come back later when you are back online. I mean, of course, that's not what we want. We want to offer a great user experience. So probably we want to store the information that the user creates while is offline, and then we want to synchronize that information whenever the user goes online again. And that will require to introduce what I call native-like features. So these features are not so much from web, but are more in the side of native apps, which we all use in our phones. So we are going to see how we can get those native-like features in our web apps. And a big role in that part will be progressive web apps. The other thing that you may be wondering is like, okay, if we allow the user to interact with our app while offline, what we do with the data? And then when that user goes online again, how we synchronize the data with our data source. So one thing that we require is a reliable storage. And we want the user data to be, of course, secure, but also synchronized. So in the rest of this talk, I'm going to cover all of these points. And this is just a small intro so you are aware of what we are going to achieve. And you also need to get used to these cat pictures. I'm going to use plenty of them. And usually this is the end of a section. So, okay, you made it. You made it to the end of this section, so we can proceed. And the next topic I want to cover is progressive web apps. And progressive web apps have few requirements, and we are going to cover all of these. The first one is it needs to run on an HTTPS hosting, and that is to provide the security for the user data and also the assets. We don't want nobody to change our JavaScript code and tampering with the data of the user in any of the steps, either when the user creates the information in the device or when the device is synchronizing the data with the data source. So this needs to be running on a safe protocol, and we will be using HTTPS for that. So that's the first requirement. Next, we will be using what is called a service worker. And a service worker will provide a technology that will allow your app to run offline. And I'm going to cover that later. Another thing that we will see when using progressive web apps is that we can change, we can customize the user experience, and we will do that for different devices. So here I can show you a mobile phone. There's also desktop app and also a tablet. Of course, these will have different properties, and you can then change, customize that experience for your user for each of these devices. Probably for a web developer, the most interesting, besides mobile, would be desktop. So you will be able to run your web app on Linux, Windows, and Mac. So that's really interesting. So let's look at the behavior of the service worker when you are offline. So in this slide, we have a single page application which will be hosted in an index HTML page. And let's imagine we go offline and the user refreshes the page. If your application is not a progressive web app, it will show the dinosaur. But let's see what happens when we actually have a progressive web app. So when we refresh the page, there will be some request that will be probably the JavaScript file for your app, and then some assets. In this example, we have the app.js file, and then we have a logo, which will be a PNG. So the index HTML page will do this request, and the service worker will capture those. And as we can see on the right side, the network is offline. So the browser cannot access this data, but the service worker can capture those requests and actually look into the cache to see if there is a match. When we install the service worker, we will store these files, these assets, so we can find those and serve those to the browser. So actually, for the browser, it will behave as if the application is online, which is quite impressive. So this is a little trick, and it requires us to install the service worker and then preload some assets that the user, when he or she refreshes the page, will get without having to be online. So this is the magic behind the service worker and the behavior that you will see happening. And usually, this is the reaction from web developers. And of course, if you haven't seen this behavior before, you will be surprised. Like, okay, now I can do some new things that I didn't know. So let's move into introducing Aws Amplify. And Aws Amplify covers what it's called full stack serverless. So maybe you are familiar with serverless. Amplify provides a full stack serverless experience, which is basically sitting in front of, in between the front end and the back end. On the back end, we have serverless, and full stack serverless is just adding the front end bit on top of that. And if we look at the different frameworks that it supports for web and mobile, you can see here all the usual suspects. So we have React, Angular, Vue, of course, vanilla JavaScript. There's also Next.js, and then all of the mobile counterparts. So we have React Native, we have also other options for Android, iOS, there's also Flutter, and for Angular we have Ionic. So it covers all of the spectrum of different frameworks. If we look at the different pieces that make Amplify, we will see that we can connect these pieces, work with them separately, or we can work with them all together. The first one that I want to talk to is the framework. And this is a set of open source libraries that we can use in order to build our applications. There will also be some developer tools that we have access to, and I'm going to cover those later. And of course, behind those applications, we will have cloud services that will provide all of the logic. In the middle of all of these different pieces, we'll see the Amplify CLI that will just automate the creation and the management of these applications. If we look at the Amplify framework, this is a set of open source libraries. These are what we call categories-based, and I'm going to cover the different categories. So these are mainly different features that you can implement in your apps that will go through data management, security, and some other features like machine learning and artificial intelligence, to name some of them. This is an opinionated framework, so you will be familiar by using Angular, and this is a set of decisions that the Amplify core team has applied, so you don't have to. So most of the things will go and just work by default with a very good set of defaults, just made for you. There's also, if you want to escape from that default behavior, you can also specify your specific behavior, so you can always use escape hatches if the default behavior doesn't fit your requirements. As developer tools go, you will be using mainly Amplify CLI, and as we do in Angular, the CLI will just scaffold our solution and just do all of the initial setup for us. So that's going to be very convenient. Another developer tool that you will have access to is the Amplify Admin Ui. So this is a specific UI that will show you how Amplify is set up behind the scenes, and you will be able to change all of the configurations through it. So that will give you access to all of the different pieces. One thing that you will be able to do is you will be able to create and manage AWS services that you will use. And it will also provide multiple environments. Depending on your setup, you will usually have development, staging, and maybe production. You can have maybe a more complex setup. You can translate that into Amplify developer tools. And then, of course, when you are developing in the cloud, sometimes you don't want to go through all of the stages and test straight into the cloud, which will be a little bit more complicated. So sometimes it's much better to just create some mocks and do local testing. So you also have that option. There's also a library of plugins that you can also use, created by the community. So these are more or less the different options that we have by using Amplify. If we look at the development cycle for Amplify CLI, these are the main commands that you will be using, and you will start running Amplify init that will create the initial setup for your project. And then you will go ahead and add new categories, depending on the feature that you want to focus at the time. So usually you would add a new category to add, for example, a data source, or you will add, for example, authentication to a solution, and you will go through this iteration for these different features. Once you are set up, you can run Amplify push, and that will create and provision the services in the cloud. And then if you need to change that configuration, that initial configuration, you can always run Amplify update and rename that specific category that you want to change. So as you can see, this is a cycle that you can follow to build your Amplify applications. And once you get familiar with it, it's very easy to use. Another thing that you can have access to is Aws Amplify Console. So that will give you a few nice features. One of them is auto deploy. So every time that you set up your environment, as we were saying, development, staging, and production, every time that you do a commit, you can set it up to auto deploy the whole front end and back end for you. So that's quite helpful. There's also many features that will come and provide deploy globally, custom domains. You can also set up branch-based deploys. And in any case, if some step fails, it will be atomic. And you can also access them with user and password. So if you need to share a test or staging environment, you can do so via URL. It supports different technologies. You can use GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, and Code Commit, so it's pretty flexible as the way you manage your source. And it also allows drag and drop. So that will be Aws Amplify Console. Just recently, there was a new release, which is the Amplify Admin Ui. And that will give you a specialized console for Amplify resources. There's no need to have an AWS account, so you can share access to this admin UI to non-AWS users, which is pretty flexible. There's also a tool to model GraphQL data, so that's also pretty handful. And there's also a built-in CMS. So once you create your GraphQL schema, you can enter new records without having to build your application to do that. So that will give you like much more speed in development. There's also the feature to manage users and security. So you can also give special access to different types and fields from your GraphQL schema to different users from the management console. So you don't have to code those changes manually. So that will give you a really high return. And if we look at the different categories, these are some of them. So we have authentication, API, which covers REST and GraphQL. We have chatbots, analytics, and also extended reality. And then for other services more common, we'll have storage, Lambda functions, and of course, hosting of our solution and notifications. For machine learning and artificial intelligence, we have translate, support for translate, poly, transcribe, recognition, and comprehend. So as you can see, it's pretty much covering everything that you may need. For this example, I'm going to be covering authentication and API, and we will be using GraphQL. So as I know, there's a lot of things to cover, so don't get too scared. I know it's a lot to handle, but we'll try to do it as easy as possible. This is some code. So the application I'm going to follow is built using Angular. I call it Chatty, and it's a single room chat that you can use. So if you want to follow a tutorial, you can follow this URL here, and it will give you all the steps to build it, or you can also run it from there. This is how it looks. So this is just a simple chat application. It will demonstrate real time. It's a single chat room. So any messages that you write will appear on the left, and any other participants will be showing their messages on the right. You will see the timestamp for the message and also the username. There's another thing that I added to this demo, and is the option to remove all of the messages, just to demonstrate the different features. All right, so let's look at the architecture. And when we are building full stack serverless apps, we are going to be reusing a lot of these services. So let's cover some of them. And the way we host this app will be using the Aws Amplify Console. So that will be hosting the HTML, the CSS, and JavaScript files. And as I was saying, it will also have this auto-deploy with your commits included. So every time you add a new feature, it will auto-deploy that with your next commit. As for authentication, we are going to be using Amazon Cognito, and that's going to allow us to create new users. The users will be able to sign up and also create their user details. And then once they sign up, they will be able to start chatting in our chat room. In order to get the app and also share the updates and the messages, we are going to use GraphQL. So that's going to give us the real-time features. So anytime a user shares a message, it will send a notification to the other users that are online. In order to do that, we are going to use AppSync, which is a managed GraphQL service. And behind the scenes, it's going to be using Amazon DynamoDB as a data source. I mean, these are all AWS services, and Amplify is going to be managing those for you. So one of the advantages of using AWS Amplify is that it will do the settings for you. So you don't need to know how to set up these services by hand. Amplify will do that for you, the same as Angular CLI sets up testing and your solution. So you actually don't have to deal with those details. Of course, if you want to change any of the configurations that Amplify decided to use, you can also go and change them. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. The Amplify CLI commands that you will use for this application are just 4. So you will run first Amplify init to set up your project. Then you will add the authentication. So you will run Amplify add Aws. And of course, this will look very familiar to you already. And when we want to add the GraphQL layer, we will also run the same command. Once we have done this on our client, we can then run Amplify push, and Amplify will make sure that all of the services in that architecture that I show you are created and also set up in the way that you can start using your app right away. So this is probably the quickest way to develop in the cloud today. So it's pretty awesome. One thing that you will have to do when developing using Amplify is creating your GraphQL schema. And a GraphQL schema is pretty straightforward. The only thing that is new, if you are not familiar with GraphQL schemas, is this directive. The directive is called add model, and this instructs Amplify to create all of the resolvers and also all of the data tables that will be required to make this type possible. And these are the messages of our chat. So we have an ID, we have the user that created the message, the actual body of the message, and also when it was created, a timestamp. Some of these types are part of the GraphQL specification. The only one that is not part of the specification is the last one, which is AWS datetime. And probably from this type definition, the only thing that it's a little bit obscure is these exclamation points. And the meaning is that these are mandatory fields. So as you can see, it's pretty easy to follow. And once you create this schema, you can start using your app. There's more things that you can add to your schema, but we are going to create this project with just one type. You could also add connections and what will be the relations in your schema, but we will keep it very simple for this example. Let's cover Amplify DataStore. And Amplify DataStore works on your device, and it could work both for web in your browser or in your mobile phone. And it's going to work in this way. So anytime that you are offline, it will create what is called a model. And for each type in your GraphQL schema, it's going to use that model to go through the storage engine and store the data in a local data store. Depending on the device, it's going to be using IndexedDB or SQLite, depending if you are running your app in a browser or you are running your app in a mobile phone. So this will cover these two different devices. When we go through the model, this will be an API, which I'm going to show some code examples, but this is not GraphQL. Actually, you're going to use a normal JavaScript API, so there's no GraphQL queries involved. These GraphQL queries will be implemented by Amplify, so it's going to be much, much easier for you to use. The data store is going to get the data, and here we are seeing the behavior when your app goes online. So once the app goes online, it uses the data store and the sync engine to synchronize the data on your device with the data in your data source. It's going to be using GraphQL, so it's going to be using subscriptions and storing the data in DynamoDB. That will be the default behavior. You can also add resolvers to AWS Lambda or Elasticsearch, so it gives you a few options there for you to implement your solution. As for the sync engine, it's going to be using what is a very simple algorithm. So it's going to be using the timestamp and the version of the record that is going to be synchronizing. And by using this timestamp and the version, it's going to be able to resolve conflicts. The way that it will use the conflict for conflict resolution is going to use the data with the latest timestamp. So it's going to be taking the last change and it's going to override anything that happened before that. This is the simplest way to resolve conflicts, but you can also add your own custom logic. So it's pretty flexible for that, and you don't have to implement it yourself, which is the main benefit. So this is going to fix or is going to solve the problem of the user using your app while offline and having to do the synchronization by hand. So that means that the user don't have to worry when he goes online and the device is going to do the synchronization automatically behind the scenes. So that's going to give the users the best experience. Let's see how that looks in code. So we have a couple of dependencies. We have the data store and also we have the model. The model is generated when we build our application, and we can just call data store save, and it's going to be using a new chatty model, and it's just going to create these properties that are going to match our GraphQL schema. So then the only thing that it's missing here is that for the timestamp is going to be using ISO string. So that's going to match that field definition that we showed before. We are using a timestamp so we can put the messages in the timeline in the correct order. The way we query data is also quite simple. And in this case, we are going to demonstrate what is called predicates, and we're going to also use the model. These are created by running the application, so it's going to be created for you from the GraphQL schema. In this case, we are going to use the query API, and we are just going to use the predicates all. That's going to query the local data store, and it's going to show that data to the user. Every time that there's a synchronization with the data source, it's going to bring a new version of that data, and it's going to also use some internal fields like the version and the timestamp in order to do this conflict resolution. So these are just a couple of examples. As you can see, we are not using GraphQL. GraphQL is going to be used on the transport layer and on the sync engine, but it's not going to be handled by you. So it's much easier to deal with. So we are right in the money, and we are ready for the next section. So how we make it a progressive web app? And we are using Angular, and we have the Angular CLI, so let's use it. And in this case, it's really easy. So we need to use the PWA plugin, and we can just run ng-add at Angular/PWA to kick off this process. That's going to create few assets, and the first one is going to be the service worker. And as we know, this is the main piece that we need to run offline. There's also going to be some assets, and this is to cover the different devices. So it's going to be covering mobile, desktop, and also any other number of devices that Progressive Web App supports. There's also the configuration for the user experience, which is covered by the web manifest, and some configuration that is specific to Angular. In this example, we are going to be looking at the details, the changes made in index.html and also the app module. So if we look at the index.html, we will see a couple of changes. One is to include the manifest, so that's to change the user experience for different devices. And also, because we have the service worker, we need to make sure that JavaScript is enabled. So these are the changes on our index.html page. As for the app module, we will see that we have a service worker module, and we register the implementation for our service worker. This is the default implementation, so you can see that it only works if we are in a production build. And this is important because it won't work if you are not in a production build. So just make sure when you are doing the test of your progressive web app that you build for production. Otherwise, the service worker will be disabled. So how we test our just created PWA? Well, as I was mentioning, we need to activate the production flag. So that's running the command ng-build with --prod. That will do the trick, and that will create the following assets. So we can see that we have some different outputs just because we run the PWA plugin, and we can look at them, but these are mainly the default configuration for the web manifest. We can also see some files, and probably the most interesting besides the service worker and also the configuration, which is the JSON file, is the safety worker. The safety worker is an escape hatch that will avoid a situation that happened in early times of progressive web apps, which was the inability to upgrade an app once it was released. So the Angular PWA team found a solution for that issue, and now it's not possible anymore. So that will avoid some problems down the line. The way I recommend you to run locally PWA is by using HTTP server, and in this case, you can run this with the production version of your build and open a new window. So that will run the solution locally, and you will be able to run your PWA without having to deploy for every change that you do. So this is a way to do that in a very quick cycle. By doing this to the application that I built, this chatty app, I found that the default PWA setup didn't work for me. As you can see, there's an issue with the logo, and the main thing is that the logo is not part of the project, is an external URL, so that won't cover the PWA setup. So I had to change the default configuration. So in order to do that, you need to look into the Angular service worker config file, which is a JSON file. And here you will find the entry point, which is the index HTML page, and also two asset groups. There's two separate asset groups, one for the app and another one for the assets. So let's look at the different changes that I had to introduce to get that logo working. And the first thing that we will see is that install mode. And install mode has two modes. One is prefetch, which is we want to preload some assets when we install the service worker, and the other option is lazy. The lazy option will wait until we do a request to catch that content. So in this case, we are going to do a prefetch, which is a preload of the resources. So these are available before we go offline. This will include any asset in your public folder. And for the logo, I had to introduce an external URL. In this case, it was hosted in GitHub. So I had to introduce this SVG as an external URL. You can do that by adding this URLs entry in the form of an array. And you can do this, for example, for Google Fonts or any external resource. Of course, you can think, okay, I can also take these resources and add them to my project. And you can do that. Sometimes you can. And in that case, you will use an external URL as I'm showing you. So if we look at the other entry, which is the assets, these are different assets that we will be using. And this is an interesting setting. We are using the lazy load option, and that means that once we install our progressive web app, we are going to be looking at different devices. So imagine we are installing this PWA on the desktop. The images are not going to be the same as if we were in a mobile device, because a mobile device uses smaller versions of the assets. So this is an interesting setting that the first time we look at the lazy load, so we are going to load only the desktop assets, and then if we update the app later on, it's going to use the desktop assets. It's not going to download the mobile or, for example, iOS assets, because we are on a desktop, maybe it's Windows, so that's going to be a very nice setting. For these assets, we are going to be using all of these extensions and anything that is in the assets folder. So it's going to catch all of those images that will change the experience for different platforms. All right, that's quite a lot of information. You can ask me later, but we are getting there. We're getting to the final section. Another cat with some animations for kicks. And once we go through all of those changes, we get our chatty PWA. So let's see what we get. Well, we get few things. Of course, we get web, but we also get mobile and desktop. For the user, that means that we can use also the application offline, which is the main goal for doing all of this. And some nice features of a progressive web app is that we can, when we use the app, we can add to home screen, and that will create app in our phone, and it will give the impression of a native app. Of course, this is still a progressive web app. It's not a native app, but the user will get a similar icon from a native app. So we can see on the left, this is an Android system, and then on the right, this is an iPhone. So that's pretty cool. We are still not done, and I'm saying 99% offline ready because there's still some things that don't work. What we have achieved is that whenever we go offline and the user does go through a reload, it will survive. It won't show the dinosaur, it won't break the application, and the user will be able to make changes. So this is quite good. We can also allow the user to store messages while offline, and we achieve that by using Amplify DataStore. There's also a way of sharing the messages when we go online. So that means that while we are offline, we are able to create messages, and without the user having to do anything, whenever the app goes online again, it will do that for you. So that gives you a really nice user experience. But there's one thing that we haven't solved, which is the user doesn't know. I mean, sometimes if you go into a place that there's no internet, you may not know. You may go into a basement, you may go into some place that the connectivity comes and goes. So we should improve that experience. So let's look into that. The way we can improve this is by using API that it's created on Amplify, and we're going to use a flag that will allow us to show a message when that network comes offline and online. The way we will do that is we will create a property in our component, and then we will use what is called a hub to listen in changes on the data store. Whenever there's a message, we will look into the network status, and that will give us a clue if the app is online or offline, and then we will make the changes to that property in our component. So that will give that feedback to the user, so the user knows, okay, now I'm offline, I'm aware of that. The way I implemented this in the app is by showing a different layout, an outline on the input, and also showing a message telling that the user is offline, and the messages will be shared whenever the network is back. So that's something that I use. You can also decide to use another approach, but just make sure that the user knows when it's offline. So let's go to an overview. I'm giving, for web single page application, I'm giving 2 stars. For PWA, I'm giving 3 stars. The main benefits is that a PWA is faster, it can work offline, and it gives you access to new platforms like mobile or desktop. It also gives you that feeling of a native-like features like add to home screen that I was talking before. So most of the time, you will win by implementing a progressive web app. As we have seen, it's not much effort. You can just run a command on your Angular CLI, and that will give you 80% of the way. Then you can do some custom configurations and maybe get like 100%, and you will just get a nice offline experience. So the sky is the limit. I like to show this as all the possibilities are open. You can do crazy things now that you know how to use these different technologies. So we have introduced PWAs, offline first. I also covered a little bit of AWS Amplify, doing that full stack serverless, and then the changes by using the PWA Angular plugin. So it's quite a lot, but I hope I could introduce you all of those technologies so you don't have to fight on your own. I would say just give it a try. I mean, if you are interested, you have a couple of resources I want to share. This is the actual solution, so you will see all the details and the configuration that I used. And there's also a workshop, so you can also go step by step and finally create the chatty app. So hope you have enjoyed. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Okay, perfect. So I'll take questions, and we already have one. Gerard, if you like, you can jump off and then on again because your webcam frozen. So, okay. So, okay, we do have a couple of questions. So let's just wait for Gerard to be back. And also, then we will have the, we will share the license for JetBrains. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. Let's see. I mean, thank you for your patience. So, Luciano, I don't know if we want to start saying something about the community.
Okay, I think we can start to share something about the ng-rom-conf.
Okay.
We are going to plan to plan an online conference. If I could remember, it's 9th of July.
Correct.
It's an half-day online conference with an international speaker. And we are going to update also our channel. So follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and YouTube channel to stay updated. For sure, you can follow and our website. So ng-rom.io. I think that's all.
I'm sharing the. Okay. Show. Look at that. Okay. So 9th of July, ng-rom.io, so no one misses it. And there will be half-day event. So it's interesting. If some of you already participated in October session, it was, I think, amazing. So a good way to stay online. And we are back again. So here we are. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And okay. So I'll start taking the question from the live and ask you to answer them. And thanks to the StreamYard platform, we can also do these, which is, I think it's amazing. Look at that. So we have a question from YouTube. So what are the benefits of using GraphQL?
Okay, well, that's a general question, but yeah, I mean, the benefits for using GraphQL is usually that you can start by defining the GraphQL schema, and then as Amplify applies, quite it's quite powerful, because once you create the schema and all the the relations between the different types. As I was showing on the talk, you can then automate everything from the API up to the data source. So that's one thing that GraphQL allows. As a GraphQL in general, so one thing that will provide is it will give you a lot of flexibility. Usually when you compare GraphQL with REST is a little bit more inflexible, as you need to build the the endpoints that sit behind an API. But with GraphQL, because you create the resolvers, the way you create a GraphQL endpoint gives you much more flexibility when you are building the client side. So that means that when you're adding a feature on the client, you don't need to ask the backend developers to build that feature to just match an endpoint for that new requirement. With GraphQL, you can build the client and the backend separately, and the teams don't need to interfere with each other. So you can create flexible, that's the query language basically. And then once you create that, it gives you much more power, and you can create a solution much faster. Probably the other benefit is that it compresses all of the queries in just one request. So for example, if you have a very complex query, which includes, for example, user profile, and then you have friends, and then you have other resources that you need to capture in one feature, GraphQL will be able to ask to the backend to all of these resources in just one request. If you try to translate that into a REST API solution, you usually have the client actually using few requests in order to grab all of the information. If you go that way, if you want to create an endpoint that actually does all of these, like a mashup of data, you probably need to put the client and the backend developers in sync, because if you add a new field, you probably need to contact the backend developers to add the field because they forgot, or you just want to add a field. With GraphQL, you can add new fields without having to interfere client and backend development. So it's just a modern way of creating a data API, just much nicer, gives you tooling, gives you developer tools, and you can automate like Amplify is using.
Okay, so thank you for the answer. And we also have another question regarding GraphQL, but I'll ask you that. And so it's actually, we have a couple of questions. So, as you know, GraphQL is something familiar with the Redux pattern. If yes, do you think that it somehow changed the way we use NGRX in Angular? I don't know if you have something to say about on this topic.
Sure. So actually, what you see in this solution is actually replacing Redux and NGRX. I mean, you could also plug in the data store in Amplify would replace your store. I mean, you could move all of the logic to the data store. I mean, it's a local copy of your your state. You can still use NGRX, but then your store will be sitting on the browser instead of in memory. So you will have an extra step to update the data store. But that's a good application of that. You can still use the NGRX store, but then your store will be using IndexedDB with an API that will do that for you.
Okay, thank you for that. And also, I mean, there is people asking if has Amplify support for platforms such as Roku, or I mean, other platforms, where you're just sitting on AWS, as we said.
Yeah, it's a AWS based tool. It's open to other cloud providers, but of course it's built for AWS cloud.
Okay, so okay, I don't think we have other questions. I mean, of course, people is thanking you for your presentation and the answers. And I'll leave you other guys if you have any question or if you want to complete something. And I mean, abuse about Gerard availability to answer our question.
Yeah, no problem.
I have a question about the progressive web app. How complex is to maintain a progressive web app with caching, app stability, versioning of the new deploy of your application? How in base of your experience, how it's easy to manage?
Well, you need to go through some learning curve. What I would recommend is that because the different states of the service worker may be a little bit confusing. You need to get familiar with how you go through an upgrade, like adding a new feature, how that looks like, what's the user experience. I mean, there are different options. It's just this going through that learning process. So for example, you get to a new feature, you just want to make sure that whatever the user experience, you have been through that, and then you also need to know what kind of devices you want to go for. There's as any other development in web, you need to go to kind of a phase where you go and check like a matrix of platforms and operative systems and whatnot. For PWA, you will be looking at for desktop is Linux, Windows, and OS systems. So you want to make sure if you are targeting a desktop, audience, you want to go and test those different platforms. If you are trying mobile, if you are developing something for mobile, you want to know what will be, if you can have control of the device. Like imagine you have a team of people that goes with a tablet and then needs this offline feature as the main advantage of it. And people will get in zones where they have no internet, and that will make sense for your development. So then you control the device, and then you just test for that device. So that will make it a little bit easier. There's some features that they are not available in, if you are using iOS. Some of the PWA features are not available, so you just need to make sure that you go through that matrix and make sure that the features that you want to target, they are available and that the user experience is what you want. Sometimes it's not enough. You would say, that's not ideal. That's not what I want. Then it's up to you. But there's a lot of improvements, and it's looking much better for iOS if you are targeting iOS. But of course, you would probably want to do a proof of concept, trying other options besides progressive web app. If you just want to open the door for offline, imagine you have a web app and you are targeting mainly browsers, because you control your audience, and your audience is mostly using a browser, and they will never use a mobile phone or Linux. Or I mean, you know your users. No, you should be able to control that. But if you are targeting like the whole audience, you'll probably find some holes. So it's not like 100%, but I mean, we face similar issues with web. So it's just making sure that you know what is your audience, and then you make sure that that experience is what you're after.
Okay, thank you, Gerard.
No worries.
Okay, Andrea, I think you have a question.
Gerard, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry, can PWA be uploaded on the story as Play Store, Apple Store, or only the website?
There's few options for you. I mean, it just depends what platform you're targeting. There's a few articles that go through the steps. I mean, I can share with you some links, but it just depends what are you targeting. But yeah, there's an option for that. But then it depends which option. I mean, there's few stores.
Okay.
But there are step-by-step tutorials for you.
Okay.
I have another question. In your opinion, a PWA can replace a mobile app in the future?
It depends. It depends who you ask.
Okay.
It depends who you ask. I mean, I've been, believe it or not, I've been in an MC in an Android conference for a few years, and I've seen what mobile Android is building, and I can tell you that you cannot replicate that on web just alone. So there's a gap between what's possible from native. I mean, there's an overlap, but there's also things that you cannot achieve. So it just depends. It's not that it's everything. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do now with web that you couldn't, but there's still some that are only available if you use native. The main issue, I mean, and then you will find, the people from web, like extreme web people, and then extreme web mobile. I would say that you need to look at it like neutral. And yeah, I agree that, yeah, there's some features that are only available for native, but then you need to build, that means that you need to build for iOS one team, Android another team, or maybe look for some framework that will give you native-like features. If you are developing from web and want some features from native or native-like, that's something that you may try. It just depends what features you want. I mean, if you want something crazy, probably you will have to move. I mean, you can stretch it, but yeah, there will be a point where, depending the feature that you want, you will have to jump into a native solution. But then it just depends what. And the main question will be economical. I mean, how much cost to maintain 3 teams, web, iOS, Android, over time? It's just a cost, factor or function. So for some people, imagine you are a team of 3 developers, forget it. You will just go for the cheap, easy one. If you are a super enterprise, no budget limit, then you just go, build for each of the platform, and then you have a specialist on each one, and it doesn't matter. So it's up to you. But of course, it will depend on that matrix, and then what kind of app you want to build. I mean, if you want to build like some immersive, 3D app, probably you will have to go native, or maybe some game. I mean, it just depends how much challenging is what you want to build. If you just want to build like a chat application, like I showed you, that's probably something, or maybe a line of business application, create a report, update some fields. I mean, that's something that you can build. I mean, it just depends what you want to build.
Thank you, Gerard.
Okay. I mean, I do agree
it's not easy to answer.
I know.
No, of course, but I mean, I do agree that there will be more apps that will be made by maybe PWA or using Ionic or other frameworks. It's the ability of the web to democratize also the development. So I think it's a plus, and the more maturity of what we're seeing that the web is becoming. So I mean, it's great. And then of course, if you need to do something that's specific, it requires that tools to do that. So I mean, I don't agree with extreme position, because it's a necessity. So that's okay. Yeah. If you need that, it's okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we have other questions, or we want to move to the raffle and give the IntelliJ license to the people. Luciano, what do you think? I don't think we have much time left. That's why.
No, I think.
And then I want to spend the good time to say thank you to Gerard. So that's why.
Maybe we can do the raffle offline. We can share the license on Twitter or Facebook.
Okay. Perfect.
For sure, I want to say thank you to Gerard. We appreciate to have you with us today.
My pleasure.
And we wait you in person in Rome for some meetup or conference or workshop. What do you want?
You can count. You can count on it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, guys, and see you soon. Next month we will have another, meetup, and then there is the conference. So a lot of events, and we will find a way to keep you updated. So thank you again, Gerard, and thank you for your talk. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.